In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and tall trees, there lived an elderly woman named Eleanor Grayson. At 82 years old, Eleanor was known for her calm nature and warm smile. She spent most of her days tending to her vibrant flower garden, knitting cozy scarves, or sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching life pass by outside. Her house was simple but inviting, filled with photographs of her late husband, Jack, and their happiest moments together. Though she rarely spoke about it, Eleanor had once been a singer, a talented one, in fact. In her younger years, she used to perform at local events, church gatherings, and even small-town festivals. But those days felt like a distant memory now. Eleanor's voice, once strong and melodious, had grown softer over time, much like the ticking of an old clock. Still, she couldn't help but hum softly as she worked in her garden or cooked meals in her tiny kitchen. Those who knew her well often remarked on how soothing her humming sounded, like a lullaby that carried stories from another era. Yet, Eleanor never thought much of it anymore. Singing was something she associated with her past, not her present. One sunny afternoon, Eleanor decided to visit the community center where weekly bingo games were held. It wasn't just about winning prizes. It was a chance to see familiar faces and catch up on neighborhood gossip. As she walked through the doors, laughter echoed from across the room. Two young women, barely out of their teens, stood near the bulletin board, giggling about something written on a flyer. Curious, Eleanor moved closer and realized they were talking about the upcoming annual talent show. "Anyone can sign up," one of them said with a smirk. "Even Mrs. Grayson could try." The other laughed loudly. "Yeah, imagine if she actually sang. That would be, interesting." Though their voices weren't loud enough to carry far, Eleanor heard every word. For a brief moment, her heart sank. She wanted to turn away, pretend she hadn't heard anything, but instead, she forced a polite smile and nodded hello as she passed them. Inside, however, a spark of defiance began to flicker. Who were these girls to dismiss her so casually? Did they really think she couldn't sing? As Eleanor continued browsing the bulletin board, her eyes lingered on the flyer for the talent show. The words, "open to all ages," caught her attention. Maybe this was exactly what she needed, a chance to remind herself, and perhaps others, that age didn't define ability. She reached into her pocket for a pen, hesitated for a second, and then scribbled her name under the list of participants. Walking home later, Eleanor replayed the scene in her mind. Was signing up a mistake? What would people say when they saw her name on the list? Would they laugh, just like those two young women had? Or worse, would they pity her? Despite her doubts, Eleanor couldn't shake off the idea that maybe, just maybe, this could be her moment to shine again. After all, she still remembered the lyrics to her favorite songs, and her voice, though quieter now, still carried emotion. Perhaps it was time to let her soul speak through music once more. The next day, Eleanor's decision to join the talent show weighed heavily on her mind. She hadn't told anyone about it yet, not even her closest friend, Margaret, who often dropped by for tea and gossip. As she watered her flowers that morning, she wondered if she'd made a foolish choice. After all, it had been decades since she last performed in front of an audience. Her hands trembled slightly as she thought about standing under bright lights, with dozens of eyes fixed on her. Would they cheer? Or would they laugh? Just as she was about to retreat indoors, Margaret appeared at her gate, waving a flyer in one hand and holding a plate of freshly baked cookies in the other. "Morning, Eleanor," she called out cheerfully. "I brought you something sweet and some news." Eleanor opened the door, forcing a smile. "News? What kind of news?" Margaret stepped inside, placing the cookies on the kitchen table. "Have you heard about the talent show? It's this Saturday, and everyone's signing up. You should do it too. It'll be fun." Eleanor froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. Should she admit she'd already signed up? Before she could say anything, Margaret continued excitedly. "Oh, come on, Eleanor. You've got such a lovely voice. Remember when you used to sing at church? People still talk about how beautiful your performances were." Eleanor chuckled nervously, brushing off the compliment. "That was years ago, Margaret. I don't think my voice is what it used to be." But Margaret wasn't convinced. "Nonsense. Your voice is timeless, just like you. Besides, it doesn't matter if you win or not. It's about having fun and trying something new. When was the last time you did something spontaneous?" Her words struck a chord. Eleanor thought back to the young women at the community center, their laughter echoing in her ears. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe this was her chance to step out of her comfort zone and prove, to herself, if no one else, that she still had something to offer. Later that evening, after Margaret left, Eleanor sat alone in her living room, staring at the flyer she'd brought home. The phrase, "open to all ages," seemed to jump off the page, almost daring her to take the leap. She walked over to her bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album. Flipping through its pages, she found pictures of herself as a young woman, standing beside Jack with a guitar in his hands. They used to perform together, their harmonies blending perfectly. Those memories brought both joy and sadness, but they also reminded her of why she loved singing in the first place. It made her feel alive. With renewed determination, Eleanor decided to practice. She chose a song she knew by heart, "Over the Rainbow." It was a classic, yes, but it held special meaning for her. Every note carried echoes of her past, the highs and lows, the dreams she'd chased, and the ones she'd let go. Sitting by the window, she began to hum softly, testing her voice. At first, it felt strange, almost foreign, but soon the melody flowed naturally, filling the quiet room with warmth. Over the next few days, Eleanor practiced whenever she could. Early mornings before the sun rose, late nights when the world outside was silent. She sang softly at first, afraid of being overheard, but gradually grew bolder. One afternoon, while tending to her roses, she caught herself singing aloud. A neighbor passing by stopped to listen, then clapped lightly. "Beautiful, Eleanor," he said with a grin. "You should share that with more people." His words gave her courage, but doubts lingered. What if the audience didn't react the same way? What if they mocked her instead? Despite these fears, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to do this. Whether it ended in applause or awkward silence, she knew one thing. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor threw herself into preparing for the talent show. Her small house became her rehearsal space, with every corner echoing her voice as she practiced tirelessly. She sang while watering her plants, while folding laundry, and even while cooking dinner. The song "Over the Rainbow" had become a part of her daily life, its melody weaving through her thoughts like an old friend returning after years apart. Each time she sang it, she felt a little braver, a little more connected to the memories it stirred within her. But practicing alone was one thing. Imagining herself on stage in front of an audience was another. Late at night, when the world outside was quiet, Eleanor would sit by her window and think about what awaited her. What if her voice cracked under pressure? What if people whispered behind their hands or rolled their eyes? Those doubts haunted her, especially when she remembered the giggling young women at the community center who had dismissed her so casually. Their laughter still lingered in her mind, a reminder of how easily people could underestimate someone based on appearances. One afternoon, as Eleanor hummed softly while knitting, her granddaughter Lily stopped by for a visit. Lily was a bright, energetic teenager who adored her grandmother deeply. When she noticed Eleanor's furrowed brow and distracted demeanor, she immediately sensed something was on her mind. "Grandma," Lily said gently, "you seem worried. Is everything okay?" Eleanor hesitated before answering. She hadn't told Lily, or anyone else, about signing up for the talent show. But now, looking into her granddaughter's kind eyes, she decided to share her secret. "I'm singing at the talent show this weekend," she admitted, her voice tinged with both excitement and uncertainty. Lily's eyes widened in surprise, then lit up with delight. "That's amazing, Grandma. You have such a beautiful voice. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Eleanor sighed, setting down her knitting needles. Because I'm scared, Lily. What if I mess up? What if people laugh at me instead of enjoying my performance? Lily reached out and took her grandmother's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Grandma, don't worry about them. You're doing this because it makes you happy, not because you need to impress anyone. And besides, anyone who laughs doesn't know how lucky they are to hear your voice. Her words struck a chord deep within Eleanor. For so long, she'd let fear dictate her choices, holding back pieces of herself out of worry about what others might think. But here was her granddaughter, reminding her that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward despite the fear. Determined to push past her doubts, Eleanor redoubled her efforts. She began recording herself singing, playing back the recordings to identify areas where she could improve. Sometimes, she'd invite Lily over to listen and offer feedback. Your voice has so much emotion, Grandma, Lily would say encouragingly. It's like you're telling a story with every note. Still, there were moments when self-doubt crept in. One evening, as she stood in front of her mirror rehearsing, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection. Wrinkles lined her face, and strands of silver framed her soft features. She wondered if the audience would see her age before they heard her voice, if they'd dismiss her before she even began. Shaking her head, she reminded herself of Lily's words. You're doing this for yourself. That thought gave her strength. By the end of the week, Eleanor felt as prepared as she could be. She had memorized every word of the song, practiced until her throat grew hoarse, and visualized herself standing confidently on stage. Yet, no amount of preparation could fully calm the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. The day of the talent show loomed ahead, and though she tried to focus on the joy of singing, the fear of judgment lingered like a shadow. Despite her nerves, Eleanor knew she couldn't back out now. This wasn't just about proving something to others. It was about reclaiming a piece of herself she kept hidden for far too long. As she tucked her sheet music into her bag and smoothed the wrinkles from her favorite dress, Eleanor whispered a silent promise to herself. No matter what happens, I'll sing with all my heart. The day of the talent show finally arrived, and the community center buzzed with energy. Families streamed in, filling rows of folding chairs while children darted around excitedly. Balloons bobbed near the stage, and colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, giving the room a festive atmosphere. Contestants milled about backstage, adjusting costumes, tuning instruments, and running through last-minute rehearsals. Eleanor stood quietly in a corner, clutching her sheet music tightly, as she watched the flurry of activity around her. Her heart pounded like a drum, each beat echoing in her ears. She felt out of place among the younger performers. Kids juggling brightly colored balls, teenagers strumming guitars, and even a pair of siblings practicing a dance routine. Every laugh, every confident stride seemed to highlight how different she was. When someone accidentally bumped into her, sending her sheet music fluttering to the floor, Eleanor bent down slowly to pick it up, her hands trembling slightly. "Sorry, Mom," the teenager muttered before rushing off, leaving Eleanor to wonder if they were laughing at her. Backstage nerves weren't limited to Eleanor. A young boy dressed in a magician's cape paced nervously, muttering his tricks under his breath. A teenage girl adjusted her microphone headset for the 5th time, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. Yet, despite the shared anxiety, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. Her mind kept drifting back to the giggling women who had mocked her weeks ago. What if others thought the same thing? What if her performance was met with awkward silence, or worse, laughter? As the MC took the stage to welcome everyone, Eleanor peeked through the curtain at the growing crowd. The room was packed, with people sitting shoulder to shoulder and some standing along the walls. She spotted Margaret and Lily in the front row, waving enthusiastically when they saw her. Their smiles gave her a flicker of comfort, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside her. When the first act, a lively tap-dancing duo, stepped onto the stage, Eleanor retreated further into the shadows. She listened as applause erupted after their performance, followed by cheers for a violinist whose notes soared through the air. Each successful act made her feel smaller, more uncertain. What could an 82-year-old woman possibly offer that would measure up? Finally, the MC announced her name. And now, please welcome Eleanor Grayson, singing Over the Rainbow. For a moment, Eleanor froze. Her legs felt rooted to the spot. Her breath caught in her throat. Backstage fell silent as contestants turned to look at her. Some curious, others skeptical. One teenager whispered loudly, "Is she really going to sing?" The comment stung, but Eleanor forced herself to move forward. Clutching the microphone with both hands, she stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her like a wave, blinding and warm. For a brief second, panic threatened to overwhelm her. But then she glanced at the audience and saw Lily mouthing, "You've got this, Grandma." Margaret gave her 2 thumbs up, her eyes shining with encouragement. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor closed her eyes and let the first note escape her lips. At first, her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a depth that silenced the murmurs in the room. As she continued, memories flooded back. Jack playing guitar beside her, the scent of summer rain, the dreams she'd once dared to chase. With each word, her voice grew stronger, richer, until it filled the entire room. The doubts, the fears, the years of silence melted away, replaced by pure emotion. By the time she reached the chorus, the audience was utterly still. No one coughed, no one fidgeted. They were captivated, hanging on every note as if Eleanor's voice held a magic all its own. And for the first time in decades, Eleanor felt truly alive. The moment Eleanor's voice filled the room, something extraordinary happened. The skepticism that had lingered in the air dissolved almost instantly, replaced by an undeniable sense of awe. Her soft, trembling start gave way to a powerful swell of emotion, each note carrying the weight of years lived, joys cherished, and sorrows endured. It was as though every word she sang wasn't just a lyric. It was a story, her story, unfolding before the audience. As she sang about rainbows and dreams, tears began to well up in her eyes. She didn't try to hide them. Instead, she let them flow freely, knowing they were part of what made this performance real. The audience could see it too. The raw honesty in her expression, the way her hands gripped the microphone like it was a lifeline. For many, it felt less like watching a performance and more like witnessing a moment of truth, a glimpse into the soul of someone who had lived fully and deeply. At first, the crowd sat frozen, unsure how to react. But as Eleanor reached the second verse, a shift occurred. A little girl in the front row leaned forward, her mouth slightly open in wonder. An older man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, nodding slowly as if he understood exactly what Eleanor was saying. Even the teenagers who had earlier laughed at the idea of an elderly woman singing were now sitting upright, their smirks fading into expressions of genuine admiration. By the time Eleanor approached the final chorus, the energy in the room had transformed completely. People weren't just listening anymore, they were feeling. Some swayed gently in their seats, while others closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. When she hit the climactic high note, her voice soared with a strength no one expected, drawing gasps from the audience. It was clear that Eleanor wasn't holding anything back. This was her heart laid bare, and it resonated with everyone present. When the final note faded into silence, there was a heartbeat of stillness. Then, like a wave breaking against the shore, the room erupted into applause. At first, it was scattered, hesitant, but within seconds, it grew louder and more unified until the entire community center vibrated with sound. People stood, clapping wildly, cheering, and whistling. Some even wiped away tears, unable to contain their emotions. Eleanor stood frozen under the spotlight, overwhelmed by the reaction. For a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. Her knees wobbled, and she gripped the microphone tighter for support. She scanned the faces in the crowd, searching for familiarity. There was Lily, jumping up and down, yelling, "Go, Grandma." Beside her, Margaret wiped her eyes with a tissue, beaming with pride. Even strangers, people Eleanor had never met before, were on their feet, applauding as though they'd just witnessed something life-changing. For a few seconds, Eleanor couldn't move. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, trying to steady her breathing. Then, slowly, she bowed her head, her lips curving into a shy smile. The applause only grew louder, refusing to die down. Someone shouted, "Encore!" and soon others joined in, chanting her name. Though Eleanor knew she couldn't sing another song, not after pouring so much of herself into this one. She felt gratitude swelling inside her, warm and boundless. Backstage, contestants who had previously ignored or underestimated her rushed to congratulate her. A teenage boy who had juggled flaming torches earlier shook her hand, saying, "That was incredible, ma'am. You're amazing." A young woman who had performed a dramatic monologue hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'll never forget that." Even the two girls who had mocked her at the community center weeks ago approached hesitantly. One of them spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Grayson, we're so sorry. We had no idea you could sing like that. That was beautiful." Eleanor looked at them, seeing not malice but sincerity in their eyes. "Thank you," she replied simply, her tone kind but firm. Sometimes people surprise us when we least expect it. As she walked off the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears, Eleanor realized something profound. She hadn't sung to prove them wrong. She had sung because it was what her heart needed, to share a piece of herself with the world, unapologetically and authentically. And in doing so, she had touched hearts far beyond her own. The morning after the talent show, Eleanor woke up to a world that felt different. Her small house, usually quiet except for the chirping of birds outside her window, seemed alive with energy. The phone on her kitchen counter rang incessantly, and when she picked it up, friendly voices poured through. Neighbors calling to congratulate her, friends gushing about how moved they were, and even strangers wanting to thank her for her performance. By mid-morning, her answering machine was full, and messages continued to pour in via text and social media. Lily had helped set up a Facebook page for Eleanor earlier that week, thinking it might be fun to share updates about the talent show. Now, the page was flooded with comments from people who had attended the event. "Your voice gave me goosebumps," one person wrote. "You reminded me of my grandmother, strong, kind, and full of wisdom," another added. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing her the songbird of Willow Creek. Reporters called asking for interviews, and radio hosts invited her to talk about her journey. It was overwhelming but undeniably heartwarming. Despite the sudden attention, Eleanor remained humble. When a reporter asked why she decided to sing at the talent show, she simply said, "I didn't do this for fame or recognition. I did it because music has always been my way of speaking when words fail. Singing again reminded me of who I am, and maybe it reminded others of who they can be." Her newfound popularity didn't stop there. Invitations began arriving in her mailbox, requests to perform at local nursing homes, community events, and even a regional arts festival. A school principal reached out, asking if she'd consider teaching a workshop for children interested in learning vocal techniques. At first, Eleanor hesitated. Could she really take on such responsibilities? But then she remembered the faces in the audience the night before. The little girl who leaned forward in wonder, the older man who wiped his tears, and she realized she had something valuable to share. Inspired by the response, Eleanor decided to embrace this new chapter of her life. She joined a senior choir, where she quickly became a beloved member, inspiring fellow singers with her passion and dedication. She also started offering free vocal lessons to kids in the community, hosting small sessions in her living room. Parents marveled at how patient and encouraging she was, while the children adored her warmth and humor. Grandma E, as they affectionately called her, taught them not just how to sing, but how to believe in themselves. One afternoon during a lesson, a shy 10-year-old boy named Tommy struggled to hit a high note. Frustrated, he slumped in his chair, muttering, I'll never get it right." Eleanor knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Tommy," she said softly, "do you know what makes a song beautiful? It's not perfection. It's heart. If you sing with your whole heart, people will feel it. That's all that matters." Tommy nodded slowly, took a deep breath, and tried again. This time, his voice rang out clear and strong. His face lit up with pride, and the other children clapped enthusiastically. Moments like these filled Eleanor with joy, reminding her why she loved music so much. It brought people together, creating connections that transcended age, background, and experience. As weeks turned into months, Eleanor's influence spread throughout Willow Creek. People started referring to her as a local legend, someone who had redefined what courage looked like. Young and old alike drew inspiration from her story, realizing that it's never too late to chase your dreams or to rediscover parts of yourself you thought were lost. Even the two young women who had initially mocked her approached Eleanor one day at the community center. They apologized sincerely, admitting they'd learned an important lesson from her bravery. "You showed us that we shouldn't judge people based on appearances," one of them said. "We're so glad we got to hear you sing." Eleanor smiled kindly, accepting their apology without hesitation. "Thank you for coming around," she replied. "Everyone deserves a second chance to learn, to grow, and to listen." By embracing her gift and sharing it with the world, Eleanor hadn't just changed her own life. She had sparked a ripple effect, inspiring countless others to find their own voices. And though she never sought the spotlight, she wore her newfound role as a symbol of hope and resilience with grace. For Eleanor Grayson, the talent show wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. As the months passed, Eleanor's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. What had started as a single moment of courage on a small-town stage grew into something much larger, a movement of sorts, one that touched lives far beyond Willow Creek. Her performances became a staple at local events, and her name was often mentioned alongside words like inspiration and legacy. People began sharing stories about how her voice had moved them, how her story had encouraged them to pursue their own passions, no matter their age or circumstances. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor received an invitation that took her breath away. It was from a regional arts council, asking her to perform at a special gala honoring individuals who had made significant contributions to the community through art and culture. The event would be held in a grand theater in the city, miles away from her quiet hometown. At first, Eleanor hesitated. She wasn't sure she belonged in such a prestigious setting. After all, she was just a woman who loved to sing. But Lily and Margaret insisted she accept, reminding her that her voice had already proven its power. On the night of the gala, Eleanor stepped onto the grand stage, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown. The theater was filled with hundreds of people, many of whom she didn't know. As she began to sing over the rainbow, the same song that had captivated the audience at the talent show, she felt a familiar warmth wash over her. This time, however, it wasn't just nostalgia or emotion, it was connection. She sang not just for herself, but for everyone in the room, knowing that each person carried their own dreams and struggles. By the final note, the entire theater rose to its feet, cheering and applauding as if they'd witnessed something monumental. That performance solidified Eleanor's place as a cultural icon in the region. Schools began teaching her story in classrooms, using her example to encourage students to embrace their unique talents. Local businesses featured her image on posters promoting community spirit, and a mural artist even painted a portrait of her on the side of a downtown building, captioned, "Courage knows no age." But perhaps the most meaningful impact came closer to home. Inspired by Eleanor's journey, other seniors in Willow Creek started stepping out of their comfort zones too. A retired carpenter began offering free woodworking classes to teenagers. An elderly woman known for her knitting started hosting craft fairs to raise money for charity. Even the younger generation felt emboldened. One teenager who had once doubted his ability to play the piano publicly decided to audition for a music scholarship, citing Eleanor as his inspiration. Eleanor also found deeper connections within her own family. Her granddaughter Lily, now more confident thanks to her grandmother's encouragement, joined the school choir and discovered a love for performing. Together, they spent weekends practicing duets, laughing over missed notes, and celebrating small victories. Their bond grew stronger with every shared melody, proving that music wasn't just a gift Eleanor gave to others. It was also a bridge that brought loved ones closer. Despite her growing fame, Eleanor remained grounded. She continued tending to her garden, knitting scarves for friends, and sipping tea by the window. But now, those moments of solitude were accompanied by a quiet pride. She had faced her fears, embraced her past, and, in doing so, inspired countless others to do the same. When asked during an interview what advice she would give to someone hesitant to follow their dreams, she replied simply, "Start where you are, use what you have, and trust that your heart will guide you." Her words resonated deeply, becoming a mantra for many. Parents told their children Eleanor's story at bedtime, framing it as a tale of bravery and self-belief. Teachers used it to motivate students who doubted their abilities. And in Willow Creek, whenever anyone hummed over the rainbow, they thought of Eleanor, the woman whose voice reminded them that rainbows exist, even after the stormiest days. Though Eleanor never sought recognition, her legacy became undeniable. She hadn't just sung a song. She had sparked a chain reaction of hope, courage, and creativity. And as she looked around at the vibrant community she had helped inspire, she knew one thing for certain: her voice would continue to echo, long after the final note faded. Years later, Eleanor Grayson's story had become a cherished part of Willow Creek's history. The town loved to recount how an unassuming elderly woman had stepped onto a small stage and transformed not only her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Parents told their children about the night Eleanor sang over the rainbow, painting it as a moment that reminded them all of the power of courage and authenticity. Even those who hadn't been present at the talent show felt connected to it, thanks to the countless retellings and the mural downtown that stood as a permanent tribute. Eleanor herself continued to live a quiet, fulfilling life. Though she occasionally performed at special events, she preferred spending her days surrounded by family, friends, and her beloved garden. Her home remained a gathering place for people of all ages. Children came for singing lessons, seniors stopped by for tea and conversation, and neighbors sought her advice on everything from planting roses to navigating life's challenges. To many, Eleanor was more than just a singer. She was a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the belief that it's never too late to shine. One summer evening, as Eleanor sat on her porch watching the sunset, Lily joined her with a guitar in hand. "Grandma," Lily said, strumming a soft chord, "do you remember teaching me this song?" She began playing Over the Rainbow, her voice carrying the same warmth Eleanor had once shared with her. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she listened, realizing how far her granddaughter, and so many others, had come because of her influence. "You know," Lily said after finishing the song, "people still talk about your performance. They say it changed the way they see things. That age doesn't define what someone can do." Eleanor chuckled softly, shaking her head. "It wasn't about age, dear. It was about taking a chance, even when you're scared. I wanted to remind myself, and maybe others, that we should always let our hearts speak." Lily nodded thoughtfully before adding, "Well, Grandma, you did more than remind us. You showed us. And now, every time someone hums Over the Rainbow, they think of you." As the years went by, Eleanor's impact only grew stronger. Local schools named scholarships after her, encouraging students to pursue their passions fearlessly. Community centers across the region adopted programs inspired by her workshops, helping people of all ages discover their talents. And in Willow Creek, the annual talent show became known as the Eleanor Grayson Talent Showcase, ensuring that her name and her spirit would live on for generations. When Eleanor eventually passed away peacefully in her sleep, the entire town came together to honor her memory. The funeral was held in the same community center where her journey had begun, and the room overflowed with people whose lives she had touched. Friends, family, and strangers alike shared stories of how she had inspired them. At the end of the service, a choir made up of former students and fellow singers performed over the rainbow. Their voices blended beautifully, echoing through the hall like a final farewell from Eleanor herself. In the years that followed, Eleanor's legacy endured. Children grew up hearing her story, learning that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward despite fear. Seniors found motivation in her example, proving that it's never too late to try something new. And whenever someone doubted themselves, they remembered the woman who had silenced skeptics with her voice, reminding them that even the quietest among us can create ripples of change. Willow Creek remained a place where dreams were nurtured and voices were celebrated, all because one woman chose to sing. And though Eleanor was no longer there to witness it, her song lingered in the air, carried by those who believed in its message. For Eleanor Grayson, music had been more than a passion. It had been a gift she gave to the world. And like the rainbows she sang about, her story continued to inspire hope, one note at a time.